The Pyrrhic Victory. A victory that inflicts such a devastating toll on the victor that is tantamount to defeat. Left victorious but with my force decimated, I had to reassess my situation. I had 17 days to take on the Apocriton, which by all means was going to be significantly harder than the War Queen. My other objective was 1000 Flake. The drugs would be possible as I had been planting over 1,000 psychoid plants throughout the last year. But I had a much more pressing issue. How was I going to take on the Apocriton, and how quickly could I complete the necessary research? I was lucky that I had already completed many of the research prerequisites, but most of the heavy mechanoids would take numerous gestation periods, and that was time that I did not have. The answer lies with the Scyther. Scythers only require 2 bandwidth and 2 gestation cycles of 2.5 days. I currently had a bandwidth total of 18, but if I made 2 more gestators in the next 2 days, I could pump out 4 to 8 Scythers over the next 2 weeks. This was going to require a lot of materials and construction. Luckily for me, resurrecting a mechanoid is far quicker and cheaper than building one. Most resurrections only take 1 gestation cycle and 100 or so steel. Among the surviving downed robots were Gary, Kenshin, Sage, Chaff, Clem, and Decimato. These would be easily repairable and left me with 2 Agrahans, 1 Constructoid, 1 Lifter, 1 Clean Sweeper, and 1 Militor. And after repairing my downed robot friends and stabilizing our base, it was time to reflect on the last battle. Mai did give her life for the colony, and unlike a Roomba, she would not easily be resurrected. I decided to dedicate the sarcophagus inside our base to her, a rare honor for a slave. On the 46th day, I realized that we were going to be short on plasteel for Scyther production. If we could not find plasteel here, we would have to travel for it. September 14th, we made our move. A caravan was dispatched to a nearby tile in search of plasteel or hidden dangers. It was a gamble. We chose a tile just north and shortly after arriving looked around. Plenty of components to our east, some plasteel and silver to the north, and an ancient danger just northwest. The ancient danger could act as a place to rest for the night, so we started there. A few medium mechanoids and a centipede. This was no problem for my squad, and we dispatched the metallic enemies with minimal damage. We only lost a few Militors, which I did not want anyways. Inside was better loot than we could have ever imagined. 11 Luciferium, medicine, and a psychic animal pulsar. The pulsar would be an absolute game changer as it could soften up the Apocriton's force before we moved in. After this, I set up a temporary shelter inside the ancient danger, and throughout the night I had my tunneler dig out the plasteel. We only got around 160 plasteel, but the loot inside the tomb more than made up for it. We came back in the dark hours of the morning on day 50, greeted by the constant rain that we had come to expect in our jungle home. Morbius and Artbass got right back to studying throughout the long night. While we were out on our trip, our waste storage became full of dormant, trash-loving insect hives. They obviously had to go, so we popped in and showed them why insectoids are inferior to mechanoids. By day 51, multi-analyzer tech was complete. The next day, I got a transmission from Anthony. The voice sounded frantic, ragged, and young. They were being chased and needed refuge. A child has the perfect-sized hands to produce flakes, so I gladly transmitted my coordinates, and young Anthony sought refuge at our base. His aggressors were nothing compared to the threats I had faced so far, and we easily dispatched them with powder and steel. I built young Anthony a bed in the place he would be spending all of his time from now on, and showed him the joys of Luciferium. With less than 7 days, flake production had to be quickly ramped up. Fields had over 1,000 plants, with the majority ready to bear fruit. And so started the great industrialized drug production in the twilight days of the year 5501. We were absolutely flying through production, and by the morning of the 52nd day, we had already amassed 120 flake. This was going much quicker than I expected. Meanwhile, more scythers continued to join our ranks. Harvest, haul, produce. These tasks became a habitual act over the coming days. By day 54, we had amassed over 300 flake, and that's when we started to get serious. We pulled Morbius away from researching, and Morbius and Anthony worked side by side day and night. They shared one thing in common, the need for the red crystal they call Luciferium. By day 55, we had passed 600 flake, but Anthony could not take it anymore and went on a food binge. And we decided to let him be. He was doing great work, and everyone deserves a break from the crack pipe factory once in a while. That same night, another scyther completed adding to our ranks, and we ended the day with a staggering 900 flake. On day 56, Art Bass finished up the production of flake, and it was now all hands on deck for research. Another trader stopped by and had something of interest: EMP grenades. Morbius and Art Bass would not need these, but grenades were the perfect tool for the hands of a 7-year-old. And in the late hours of the day, our last scyther had completed gestating. The war force was ready. Day 57 was very peaceful. Anthony continued to make flake while the adults continued to frantically research. And on a sunny afternoon of the 58th day, we completed researching high mech tech. And that's when I noticed we needed advanced components to make the mech band dish. If you don't know, the mech band dish is required to call down to Apocriton. I blew it. But then I had a thought. What if I shred the boss mechanoids I killed earlier? Surely they're worth some high-end materials? Nope. Still fucked. So Morbius set out on a caravan to the nearest trader. All we needed were 2 advanced components, but the journey would take 1.9 days each way, so I was certain to miss my 1-year deadline. With that being said, a late journey is better than an incomplete one. I was going to see this to its end. While I was impatiently watching my caravan travel across the map, a panther hunted Anthony, and with no help nearby, he quickly fell victim. Art Bass scared off the panther from the body, but he did not make it in time. We decided to give Anthony a funeral in the place he loved the most, the drug lab. There he could rest forever until the toxic spillage consumed him. Rest in peace, Anthony. Morbius finally arrived at his destination on the 16th hour of the 60th day on this planet. Our 1-year anniversary, and so much had changed. We quickly purchased their stock of advanced components and headed back. On our return, a 6-year-old child named Grunt stopped by our settlement. Art Bass was currently suffering a mental break and sadly wandering around, so there was no chance we were going to say no. Grunt was a peculiar kid. He came in wearing a gas mask and carried a revolver, and he was incapable of almost everything, but he would be capable of holding EMP grenades, so it kind of worked out. And of course, on his 61st day, by a stroke of poor luck, that same fucking panther decided to hunt Grunt. I even checked the social logs, and it was the same bastard with a bullet wound in him. He ended up taking out Grunt before help arrived, but I made sure to finish the job this time. It turns out, looking at the travel map with children is not a great idea. The 63rd morning had Morbius make it back to the colony on the brink of starvation, but carrying 2 advanced components. It had been 63 days living in this jungle, and I was ready to end it one way or another. On day 64, the dish was completed and our Ragnarok had finally arrived. It was time to gather our forces and end this story. The Apocriton was going to come with a heavy escort of 6 Militaurs and 5 Scythers, not to mention a heavy mech shield on the Apocriton itself. We did not know how long it would take, so we started barricading the entrances and building up our defenses. A mere 1 hour later, the Grim Reaper had arrived, right next to a pack of boomalopes. And you know what I just happened to have? The animal pulsar sent out a shockwave of psychic energy on a wavelength targeted at animals. It twisted their minds and induced a false sense of rage. And so the war camels with hate in their eyes went straight for the mechanoid threat, but mechanoids were impervious to fire and they cleaned them up with relative ease. But then the rhino threat from the west charged in with dignity into their front lines. Horn and biological mass met steel and blade. The mechanoid force was taking casualties fast, but then the Apocriton entered the fray and resurrected his fallen comrades to continue their death march. The enemy force continued to meet countless resistance from disgruntled wildlife, and in this moment I saw my chance. We only had one line of action: to cut off the head of the snake. The Scyther assassination squad we had been producing over the last month was ready. With the enemy force in disarray and split in purpose, our frontline squad smashed head-on with the Apocriton, isolated and vulnerable. Metallic arms made of bladed steel echoed the sound of metal gliding against metal as we hacked away at it piece by piece. We ruthlessly dealt blow after blow until the moment of salvation. A Scyther blade warped its way through a crack formed on the neck and in an instant severed the bionic spinal column that connected the monstrosity. A devastating eruption of red cackling magnetic energy swept across the battlefield, leaving mechanical creatures senseless. The Apocriton had fallen. The 65th day, our journey was complete. 1000 Flake and all 3 Mechanoid bosses in just over 1 year. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.